When my father raised his glass that night, I thought he was about to toast me. Instead, he smiled and said, "Consider this our final investment. Nicole." 100 relatives froze as he handed me an envelope, a printed invoice, $312, labeled room, board, and inconvenience. My sister took the microphone, called it a necessary closure. And the crowd laughed like it was a joke. But it wasn't. It was my birthday. And in front of everyone I'd ever known, my family officially erased me. I remember the applause. I remember my mother adjusting her pearls instead of stopping it. I remember standing there, pretending I still had skin thick enough to survive it. That's the thing about humiliation. It doesn't kill you instantly. It just starts the countdown to who you'll become after the wreckage. My name is Nicole Stanton. And that night, I learned that sometimes blood isn't family. It's data waiting to be decoded. I've never liked the kind of parties where the string quartet never stops playing and the champagne keeps flowing just to prove it can. But that was my father's stage, where laughter came rehearsed and compliments carried the weight of contracts. That night, the garden behind our Lake Travis estate was draped in soft gold light. The lake shimmered under the glow, perfect enough to make anyone believe we were the kind of family worth admiring. 100 people stood beneath white canopies, relatives, politicians, investors, each one pretending to belong to something flawless. I'd driven straight from Austin, still in my work clothes, arriving just in time to hear the orchestra fade. My father tapped his glass. Silence spread like static through the crowd. His voice filled the air, measured and clear, as if he were delivering a speech rather than a sentence. Across the garden, my mother smiled her practiced smile, passing the microphone to my sister. Elise. Her gown caught the light like she'd been waiting for this moment her whole life. She opened an envelope, read words that made a few people laugh politely, people who thought humiliation could pass for humor. I didn't move. The laughter blurred into one continuous sound, something sharp enough to slice through skin. I could feel the heat of the light searing my face, the ground tilting under my heels. Some parties end with music. Ours ended with erasure. And in that perfect applause, I learned that silence could hurt louder than any sound. I left the estate the moment the orchestra started playing again. The laughter faded behind me, replaced by the hum of tires against the empty highway. The golden envelope sat on the passenger seat, heavy as a live explosive. I didn't touch it until I was back in my apartment in Austin, where the air felt still and ordinary, as if the world hadn't just turned against me. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of thick paper, each line item printed in bold: housing, education, living expenses, and one handwritten addition at the bottom: emotional labor, $5,000. At the corner, Elise's signature curved with perfect precision. Not my father's, hers. I scanned it under the desk lamp. It wasn't a bill, it was a statement, one that reduced 32 years of existence into columns and decimals. My throat tightened as I opened my laptop, running the file through forensic software out of pure habit. Then I saw it, a line buried deep in the metadata, exported from Stanton Bioserver 4. Timestamp 02:17 a.m. My pulse slowed. Stanton Bioserver 4. That was the internal server I had secured for the company myself. There was no reason for a family invoice to exist there unless someone wanted it to look official. I tried accessing the server through an old encrypted route. Denied. The screen flashed red. User N. Stanton flagged. Breach risk. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the alert. This wasn't humiliation anymore. It was premeditated, a blueprint for destruction. My family wasn't just cutting me off. They were preparing a legal record to erase me completely. The glow of the screen flickered across my face, painting the room in cold light. I realized the party hadn't ended when I left. It was still happening, just in another format, one I understood better than anyone. Hours blurred into dawn. I sat in the dark, surrounded by silence that hummed like electricity. When I dug into my local cache, I found something they'd missed. A hidden log saved automatically during the last system update. The file showed Elise's activity under my credentials. 2 a.m, she'd accessed the finance server, copied the accounting sheets, and swapped the name of the responsible party to N. Stanton. That was the first fracture of truth. They'd transferred a company loss, $312,000, into my name. then dressed it up as a family expense. I kept searching. My fingers moved by muscle memory, pulling command lines, opening archives. Then a new folder surfaced. Ness, Solutions, Zip. My chest tightened as I unpacked it. Inside was a business license from Delaware. The registered owner, Nicole Stanton. My sister hadn't just betrayed me. She'd built an entire shell company on the fusion of our names, using mine as camouflage. I stared at the screen until my reflection blurred into the code. Anger didn't come. Only clarity, sharp and precise. The party at Lake Travis wasn't spontaneous cruelty. It was a staged declaration, a legal precursor to a fraud case. They hadn't simply disowned me. They'd repurposed me, turned me into the ghost of their own accounting. And if they thought I wouldn't notice the pattern, they'd forgotten who wrote the system in the first place. I didn't sleep for 3 nights. The image of my father raising his glass, Elise reading from that paper like it was a verdict, kept looping behind my eyelids. By the 4th morning, I gave up pretending to rest and opened my laptop. The system I once built to keep outsiders away now flashed red in my face. Breach detected. User suspended. I tried a secondary access route, one only I should know. Within minutes, my phone rang. The voice on the other end was dry, methodical, corporate. Robert Hale, Stanton Biotech's internal counsel. We're investigating unauthorized access linked to your credentials. My mouth went cold. I asked, unauthorized? Into a system I designed? He didn't answer. There was a pause. A faint sound of typing, then a clean disconnect. An hour later, an email from my mother appeared in my inbox. 1 sentence. Stop this before you embarrass your father any further. No concern, no hesitation, just an order. I stared at the words until the letters blurred. Then I deleted it, disconnected the router, and sat still long enough to hear the soft hum of the CPU fan turning like a slow heartbeat. They weren't done with me. That much was clear. The party wasn't the end. It was the launch. They were closing in, constructing a version of me that could be punished. I opened a drawer and pulled out an old business card. Grant Miller, financial forensics consultant. Once, he'd worked for the FBI. Once, I'd saved his case files from being wiped clean by ransomware. If I still had any chance left, it was somewhere in those same lines of code we both understood too well. Grant arrived the next afternoon, still in his brown jacket that smelled faintly of rain and old coffee. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. Tell me about the invoice, he said, eyes scanning the cluttered desk. I handed him the flash drive. He plugged it in, scrolling through layers of digital logs until his posture stiffened. Nicole, do you know what NES Solutions is? I shook my head. He enlarged the document on screen, a Delaware business license. Owner, Nicole Stanton. It hit me like a physical blow. He traced a series of transactions on his tablet, mapping arrows from Stanton Biotech's research fund to NES Solutions, and then back again, labeled as consulting fees. They're laundering through you, he said. Money goes out disguised as research investment, comes back through NES as security consulting. You're the perfect scapegoat. I felt my pulse in my ears. They'd weaponized my own expertise against me, using cybersecurity as the disguise for financial crime. Grant leaned back, eyes narrowing. That party you mentioned, was it filmed? Yes, I said. All of it. Elise hired a production crew through her media firm. He exhaled, rubbing his forehead. Then you're already in the file. That video isn't a show, it's proof of notification. When they file charges, it'll look like you were officially informed and ignored it. The realization landed cold. The birthday celebration had been a pre-recorded hearing. So I've already been sentenced, I said quietly. He nodded. They erased you in public and resurrected you on paper. It's brilliant, in a horrifying way. He pulled up another document, an HR notice signed by the company attorney, Nicole Stanton, former employee, security liability. Elise had gone further than I imagined, deleting my employee profile, shifting every unresolved breach onto my record. Outside the window, dusk spread over Lake Austin, turning the water into molten bronze. I stood there, letting the silence weigh itself across the room. If they're fighting with lawyers and cameras, I said, I'll fight where they can't see me. Grant's voice dropped. Where's that? Inside the data, I said. The unedited logs. The originals. There was only one person who could have them, my Uncle Daniel, the former chief accountant who had vanished quietly after his early retirement. And for the first time since that night, I knew exactly where to start looking. I left Austin before sunrise without telling a soul. The apartment was stripped bare, just a suitcase and my laptop left behind like evidence of an evacuation. I drove north until the city lights vanished, ending up in a small room outside Dallas where the trains passed close enough to shake the walls. I deleted my social accounts, turned off my phone, and built a network that no one but me could trace. On a blank screen, I typed, "Silence is my firewall." For the first time, quiet felt like control. By midday, Elise shattered it. She'd posted on LinkedIn, thanking everyone for their support during a sensitive corporate matter. She didn't use my name, but she didn't have to. Every comment did it for her. Within hours, 3 consulting contracts vanished from my inbox. I saved the post, captured every response, and filed it into a folder called Social Evidence. Each line of gossip was now documentation. Then came an email from my mother. Subject line, "Stop before it's too late." One sentence, "You're destroying your father's reputation." Not a question, not concern, just the familiar hierarchy of image over integrity. I typed back, "Tell him reputation isn't integrity," and stored it under a new folder, Exhibits. That night, the glow of my monitor cast ghostlight on the window. A text appeared from an unknown number. "I know about NES Solutions. I signed checks for them. Meet me, D." The single letter punched the air from my lungs. Daniel Stanton, my father's brother. The man who had disappeared after last year's audit. I forwarded it to Grant. His reply came fast. "If he's real, be careful. People who know that much don't stay breathing for long." 2 hours later, my phone rang again. No caller ID. The voice was weak, almost breaking. "Nicole, it's me. They're scrubbing the servers before the SEC steps in. I still have the old logs. Meet me tomorrow morning." I sat in the dark, pulse steady, eyes on the static blue glow of the screen. The truth was finally reaching for me. But once I touched it, there'd be no undoing the code. The cafe in North Dallas smelled like burned espresso and rain. Daniel sat in the corner, smaller than I remembered, his hands shaking around a cold paper cup. "I knew what they were doing," he said quietly, but silence paid better than guilt. He explained how my father and Elise had drained the employees' retirement fund into NES Solutions, disguising it as a cybersecurity investment. When he confronted them, they forced him into early retirement, compensated for his silence. When I asked for proof, he handed me a silver flash drive. "Unedited logs," he said. "You're the only one who can read them." The files opened like open wounds. The executor, E. Stanton. The owner field overwritten to N. Stanton. The date, my birthday. Elise had altered the data while I stood in that garden, oblivious. A note buried in the metadata read, "Rotor location, Lake Travis, guest Wi-Fi." The fraud had been executed right there, under the chandeliers and applause. Daniel's voice cracked. "Your father thought erasing you would save the company. Elise thought she was protecting him. But what they did, it's a crime." I met his eyes. "Why help me now?" He gave a hollow smile. "Your father taught me to hide numbers. You taught me to reveal them." Then he leaned closer. "Elise is selling NES Solutions to an overseas investor next week. Once that deal closes, every trace disappears." A chill climbed my spine. I gripped the drive tighter. "Thank you, Daniel. From here, I take over, outside." Dallas flickered like circuitry. For the first time in months, the system was mine to command. The hunt had turned, and I was no longer the one being hunted. I returned to Austin quietly. 3 days before Elise's deal was set to close, Grant arrived with his laptop and a decryption rig, and we worked in near darkness, the glow of the screens painting our faces pale. He asked if I was certain. I was. If I didn't act now, they'd erase everything and I'd be the one imprisoned for it. I connected Daniel's drive and tunneled into the family network. The router name blinked on my screen, Stanton Legacy. The irony stung. Legacy, built on lies. The system had been rebuilt under Elise's supervision. Every login was traced to her admin account. If I failed, it would look like I'd broken into my own creation. So I used the identity they'd already forged for me, N. Stanton. Lines of code opened like veins. Each fraudulent transaction matched the exact moment of my birthday speech. The money moved through Lake Travis guest Wi-Fi, Elise's account executing every transfer. At the end of the trail waited one file. Investor transfer bot NES. She was preparing to sell the shell company abroad. I encrypted everything into one archive, audit of blood, zip, and sent it to Grant. 3 hours later, the news broke. SEC opens investigation into Stanton Biotech, and that night, their mansion went dark. 2 weeks later, a formal notice arrived bearing the Stanton Biotech seal. The company's board had summoned me to a hearing, one attended by shareholders, attorneys, and 2 representatives from the SEC. The air in the conference room felt sterile and electric, every whisper measured, every chair perfectly aligned. Elise sat across the table, her hands trembling on a stack of documents. My father stood behind her, his tie perfectly straight, his expression carved from pride and denial. The chairperson spoke, requesting the video file labeled Family Dinner, Lake Travis. The screen lit up. The violin music began, the same notes that had accompanied my humiliation. There was Elise again, reading from her printed ledger, her voice smooth as glass. When she reached $312,000, the footage froze, and beside it, another window opened, displaying a live timestamp of the transaction that occurred at that exact second. Elise's eyes darted toward her phone. The SEC agents immediately blocked all outgoing signals. The silence that followed was surgical. I stood and handed over the unedited log Daniel had saved, the one with Elise's digital signature, E. Stanton. The match was absolute. The chairperson turned to me. Ms. Stanton, do you have anything to say? I met Elise's eyes. They disowned me to erase me, but data never forgets. The room went still. My father broke first, stepping forward, voice shaking. It was my order. Elise acted under my instruction, for the company's good. The lead investigator looked up. Then you've just confirmed yourself as a co-conspirator. A murmur rippled through the room. Then one of the shareholder attorneys stood and presented new evidence, a clip of Elise signing the sale agreement for NES Solutions to an overseas buyer. Elise's shoulders collapsed. I only wanted to save us, she whispered, before breaking down. The chairperson spoke again, voice cold and final. All Stanton family assets are now under federal review. My parents didn't protest. Flashes from cameras erupted as I walked out. For once, no one looked at me with pity. They looked at me like someone who'd crawled out of an explosion still standing. Grant waited in the hallway, holding the elevator door open. You won, he said softly. I shook my head. No, justice did. I just brought the truth back online. A year later, Austin had grown quieter in my mind. I lived in a small apartment overlooking a park, the kind of place where morning light slipped through blinds like forgiveness. I no longer woke to notifications, only the sound of my coffee maker sputtering and the steady rhythm of a city moving on without me. I taught a course called Cyber Ethics at the local university. Most of my students were 20-somethings with too much curiosity and not enough fear. One of them asked why I chose this subject. I smiled and said, because truth deserves to be encrypted, not manipulated. They laughed softly, not knowing how literal that was. That night, on my birthday, I walked along the lake trail. The air smelled faintly of cedar and smoke. Across the water, fireworks bloomed, gold, blue, white, rising and dissolving like lines of code written on the sky. For a moment, the colors reflected off the surface so perfectly, it felt like the lake itself was remembering. My phone buzzed in my pocket. An email notification blinked on the screen. Restitution fund, claimant, Nicole Stanton, status, settled. I opened it halfway before my eyes caught a smaller line at the bottom. Amount transferred, $312,000. The number pulled a quiet laugh out of me. The same figure that once bought my humiliation had come back as repayment, an accidental apology wrapped in bureaucracy. I stood there for a long time, thumb hovering over the attachment. Then I deleted it. No downloads, no receipts, no records. I wasn't interested in what they thought I was owed. I'd spent too long being defined by debts. Financial, emotional, familial. And now, for the first time, I owed nothing to anyone. Not forgiveness, Not explanation. Not even acknowledgement. The fireworks reached their finale, bursting above the same Lake Travis that had once been the stage for my erasure. The reflections shimmered over the dark water, unchanged yet entirely different. I whispered to myself, not in triumph, but in peace. For the first time, silence is mine. And it was. Not the silence they had forced on me, but the kind I had built, line by line, truth by truth, until it became freedom. The screen of my phone went black, and I let it stay that way. The night was full enough without it.